Why was the sky so quiet that morning? That was the thought that struck her first. Carter pressed her forehead against the cabin window, eyes scanning the ramp where fuel trucks rolled, baggage carts rattled, and men in neon vests hurried beneath the belly of a jetliner. The 737 looked enormous to the average traveler, but to her, it was a familiar machine. Every switch, every panel, every angle of those sweeping wings had lived in her mind for years. She was only 12, but inside her the hum of engines had always sounded like something more, a calling. Her father's hand rested gently on her shoulder, a little heavier today, as though he feared she might break. He had been quieter than usual since Denver, and she understood why. This wasn't just a trip, it was a farewell. In the carry-on at his feet, nestled in velvet, rested an urn, her mother's ashes. Captain Rachel Carter, an Air Force pilot who had spent years flying drones over hostile skies, a woman whose hands had guided machines across deserts half a world away. She was supposed to come home from training. She didn't. Now and her father were headed to Florida to let her go, to the water, to the horizon her mother had always said was the edge of freedom. The flight attendant smiled as they boarded. "Good morning. Seats 16A and B just down the aisle." Nodded politely but barely heard. Her eyes lingered on the cockpit door, just a door to most. To her, it was a gateway, a place she had dreamed of stepping through her entire short life, a place she wasn't supposed to enter, not yet. "You'll get your turn one day," her mother used to say. "Patience, Em, patience and discipline, that's what flying is." But patience was hard when the smell of jet fuel filled her lungs, and the glow of screens flickered just beyond reach. She buckled her belt, resting her cheek against the cold window. Her father slid a photo from his wallet, a faded shot of Rachel in her flight suit. He laid it on the tray table without a word. His eyes glistened, but he forced a smile. "She'd be proud of you." Nodded. She didn't answer. Pride wasn't enough, not today. The captain's voice broke over the intercom. Smooth, steady, the kind of voice that wrapped you in reassurance. "Good morning, folks, Captain here. We'll be heading east, flight time about 3 hours. Clear skies most of the way. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride." Passengers chuckled softly, already tugging out books, plugging in headphones, whispering small talk. For them, it was ordinary. For her, every detail felt monumental. She watched ground crew wave signals, felt the rumble as engines roared, counted in her head as the aircraft lunged forward. 1, 2, 3, and by 5 the earth fell away. Take off, the moment she lived for, the break from gravity, the climb toward endless blue. Her father's hand brushed hers. She squeezed back, but her gaze never left the wing slicing through clouds. And for a while it was just flight, smooth, ordinary, uneventful. Until it was. At first it was subtle, a flicker of movement through the narrow slit of the cockpit door when a flight attendant delivered coffee. The first officer shifting strangely in his seat, eyes fluttering as though fighting sleep. A dropped cup, a hand trembling against the throttle. Her pulse quickened. "Dad," she whispered, "something's wrong." He frowned. "What do you mean?" "The pilots," her voice trembled, "they're not moving." As if on cue, the door swung open again. The attendant slipped inside. Moments later she reappeared, her face pale as snow, her voice breaking over the cabin speakers. "Ladies and we are experiencing a technical issue. If anyone on board has flight experience, please come forward." The words didn't settle at first. Passengers chuckled nervously, mistaking it for a joke. A man muttered about lawsuits. A woman clutched her pearls, but the cabin air shifted, thin, uneasy. His chest tightened. The photo of her mother still sat on the tray, her eyes burned. "I can do it," she whispered. Her father turned, confused. "What?" "I can fly this plane." The absurdity of it hit him first. "I know this model, every switch, every system. I've flown it on the simulator for years. Dad, I can do it." "No, this isn't a game." "It's not a game." She straightened, voice steadying with something that felt older than her years. Someone has to, and no one else will. The attendant's voice cracked again, urgent now. If you have experience, please come forward immediately. Unbuckled, her knees wobbled as she stood. Dozens of eyes turned toward her. A ripple of disbelief moved through the cabin. A child, walking toward the cockpit. Her father's hand caught hers. He hesitated, torn between fear and trust. At last he gave a single, trembling nod. And just like that, Carter stepped into history. The cockpit smelled faintly of coffee and ozone. Both men lay slumped, pale, barely breathing. Instruments glowed, steady for now, but fragile. The attendant stammered, "Sweetheart, where are your parents?" Lifted her chin, "I'm the one who can help." "You're 12. I've flown this exact model in simulation. Hundreds of times. I know the layout. I know the systems. Please let me try." Silence, the kind that stretches and decides fate. Then, with trembling lips, the attendant whispered, "Okay, come in." The seat swallowed her small frame. Her feet barely brushed the pedals, but her hands knew this space. She scanned the displays, heart thudding like a drum. Altitude, airspeed, heading. Autopilot engaged, for now. She pressed the radio button, her voice shaking. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Flight 782. Both pilots are unconscious. Request immediate assistance. Over." Static. She tried again, adjusting frequency. "Mayday, this is Flight 782. I'm in the co-pilot seat. The pilots are down. Please respond." Crackling, then a voice, calm, professional. "This is Jacksonville Center. Say again, who is speaking?" Her throat tightened, but she forced it out. "My name is Carter. I'm 12 years old. The pilots are unconscious. I'm trying to control the aircraft." The silence that followed was heavier than steel. "Did you say 12? "Yes," she snapped, more sharply than she meant. "But I know what I'm doing. Please, I need help." In a tower hundreds of miles away, the controller's hand hovered over her mic. Veteran of 2 decades, had guided aircraft through hurricanes, engine failures, near collisions. But never this. "Okay, my name is, I'm going to help you. First, tell me your altitude." His eyes darted. 30,000, airspeed 462, heading east-southeast. A pause, then softer. "That's correct, you're doing just fine, we'll get you home." Exhaled, trembling. For the first time, her eyes flicked to the photo still taped on the yoke, her mother, smiling in her flight suit. A whisper escaped her lips, "Help me, Mom." She straightened again, voice clear. "Okay, tell me what to do." And somewhere deep in her chest, past the fear, past the grief, past the part of her that was still just a child, she felt it. The quiet strength her mother had carried into combat zones. The steadiness of a soldier who knew panic was useless. The heart of a pilot who never stopped believing in the sky. Carter was 12 years old, but she was also Rachel Carter's daughter. And she was about to prove it. What if they didn't believe her? That was the first fear that struck. Not the instruments glowing, not the weight of the yoke under her trembling hands. It was the silence that followed her words across the airwaves. She had declared herself, 12 years old, at the controls of a passenger jet, and the world had paused to decide whether to trust her. Finally, his voice returned, calm, steady, as if wrapped in steel. "All right, I believe you. I need you to stay with me. Just stay calm. Can you do that?" His throat felt tight. She wanted to say no. She wanted to scream. But instead, her mother's voice whispered in her mind, "Calm is your co-pilot." "I can do that," whispered back. The attendant, Claire, stood frozen behind her, eyes flicking between the unconscious pilots and the child in the seat. She wanted to protest, to pull out and strap one of the grown men back into place. But the stillness of those pilots, the slackness in their faces, said otherwise. They weren't waking up. Not yet. "Close the door," said without looking up. Claire blinked. "What?" "Close the cockpit door, lock it. Don't tell the passengers it's me. Just say we're working on it, please." Claire hesitated. Then she nodded slowly, almost reverently. "You're amazing," she whispered before closing the door. Stared at the flight displays. The autopilot was holding level for now. But autopilots didn't last forever. Machines failed. And when they did, it would be her. She pressed the mic again. "The plane steady, what now?" "Good, that's good. We're going to reroute you to Augusta Regional Airport. Smaller, safer, fewer planes, less chaos. But first, I want you to breathe, slow. In through the nose, out through the mouth. Can you do that for me?" Obeyed. She hadn't realized how fast she'd been breathing, how sharp her chest felt. "Better," said softly. "Now look down at your mode control panel. Confirm autopilot is engaged, heading select is on, altitude hold is set." His eyes darted across the switches. "Confirmed. Altitude 30,000, heading 135. "Perfect. Now turn the heading dial to 112. We'll start lining you up toward Augusta." She did. The jet banked gently. Her stomach dropped with the tilt, but her hands stayed firm on the yoke. "Good correction," his voice steadied her. "Now lower altitude to 24,000, nice and slow." Reached for the throttle levers. Her fingers trembled, but she eased them back. The engines roared softer, the nose dipped. Clouds swelled beneath them, brilliant white against endless blue. She should have been terrified, she was, but mixed with fear was something else. Wonder she was flying, not in her room, not on a screen, for real. A spark of pride flickered and was drowned by another thought. One mistake and they would all die. In the cabin, passengers whispered. A man in row 18 stood, voice sharp. "What's happening? Who's flying the plane?" Claire blocked him quickly. "Sir, sit down. Everything is under control." "No, it is." His voice carried, sparking fear down the rows. "I heard what you said. The pilots are out cold. Who's in there?" Claire's face didn't flinch. "It's being handled." But rumors spread like wildfire. Some whispered it was terrorists. Others swore the attendants were lying. One teenage boy muttered that he'd seen a child walk into the cockpit. The air thickened with panic. In the co-pilot's chair, shut it all out. "Focus on me," his voice commanded. "Don't listen to anything else. You and me, just us." "Copy," said. "Good girl, now ease her down. Slow descent, 500 feet per minute." Adjusted controls. Her heart thudded with each beep of the altimeter. For a moment, silence filled the cockpit. Then a flicker on the fuel panel caught her eye. "I think there's a problem with fuel imbalance. Left tank, draining faster." Muttered something under her breath, muffled static. Then, "Okay, manageable, we'll balance later. For now, keep your descent steady. Don't let it shake you." But it did shake her. Not her hands, they stayed steady. But inside, she felt the crack. If the fuel ran wrong, if the system failed, if autopilot gave out. She swallowed. What if autopilot fails? A pause. Then the controller's voice came back, softer than before. "Then you fly by hand, just like the simulator, yoke, rudder, throttle. Your hands already know what to do." Pressed her palms to the yoke, feeling its weight. She whispered to herself, "Calm is your co-pilot." The door muffled a new sound, applause. Someone in the cabin had started clapping. Others followed, uncertain but desperate for hope. She didn't look back. She couldn't. His voice returned. "You're descending perfectly. I've cleared the airspace around you. You're the only bird in the sky for 50 miles, just you. All eyes are on you now." That weight pressed heavy. She glanced at the photo taped to the yoke, her mother in uniform, smiling as if daring her to quit. "Not yet." "Okay," said voice firm. "What's next?" But even as her words carried conviction, doubt gnawed at the edges of her heart. Was she really flying, or just delaying the fall? Why was everyone shouting? The sound seeped through the cockpit door like a storm pressing against steel. Gripped the yoke harder, trying to block it out, but the voices pierced, angry, panicked, demanding answers. Inside, she stayed still. Outside, chaos was building. A man's voice rose above the others. Are we being flown by a child? Her father's voice answered, firm but trembling. Everyone, please stay calm. My daughter knows what she's doing. But calm was slipping. Fear traveled row by row like fire across dry grass. Some passengers clutched rosaries, others wept openly. A mother whispered frantic prayers while pressing her infant's face into her chest. The plane itself stayed steady, descending through thin layers of cloud. But inside it felt like it might fracture at any second. Hurd's voice in her headset. Don't listen to them, don't even think about them. Focus on me. What's your current indicated airspeed? Her eyes darted to the display. 287 knots. Perfect. Let's bring that back gradually to 250. Turn the dial on the MCP, then ease your throttle. Adjusted, breath shallow. The roar of the engine softened as speed reduced. Good correction, said. Now, I want you to understand something. Everyone out there, every single soul is scared. But the reason they're still alive right now is because you stepped forward. That's the truth. Don't let their panic steal your focus. Nodded even though couldn't see her. Copy. Her hands were steady on the controls. Her heartbeat was not. Behind her, Captain groaned faintly her head whipped around. Captain. His eyes fluttered, lips moving weakly. A sound escaped, half word, half moan, before he slumped again, sweat shining on his forehead. One of them stirring, but he's not conscious. Copy, probably hypoxia. Medical team will meet you on the ground. Don't waste a second worrying about them now. They're passengers just like the rest. You're the pilot. The word hit like a weight. Pilot, her mother's word, her dream, now her reality. Her voice cracked. I'm scared. Didn't hesitate. Everyone's scared in the sky, even the best, but the best don't freeze, and you haven't frozen. Blinked hard, swallowing tears. Calm is your co-pilot. Okay, his voice softened. We're going to start the approach checklist. Are you ready? I'm ready. Flaps are still up. Reached for the lever, confirming. Up. Good, speed brakes armed. Yes. Auto brakes off. She checked off. Keep them off for now. We'll do manual braking. Now check your current altitude. Descending through 26,000. Excellent, let's aim for 5,000 before final. The numbers sounded clean, mechanical, but the weight behind them pressed heavy. 26,000 feet, hundreds of miles of air, and her hands were all that kept it from turning into a grave. In the cabin, tension rippled louder. A passenger shouted again. This is insane, she's a kid. We're all going to die. Claire snapped back. Sit down, sir. But the words did little. Panic surged. Another voice cried, we need to know who's flying this plane. Squeezed her eyes shut. Don't listen, don't listen. Must have sensed her breaking. Focus on me, Captain, just you and me. Forget the noise, you're already halfway home. Opened her eyes. The runway wasn't in sight yet, but she believed. She had to. Okay, she whispered. Tell me the next step. Minutes passed like hours. The aircraft sliced through banks of clouds, turbulence rattling the fuselage. Corrected lightly, small touches on the yoke, just enough. The lights flickered suddenly, she gasped. The systems just dimmed. Copy, could be a voltage drop. Switch to backup generator. Button marked APU gen. Scan quickly, fingers landing on the switch. She flipped it. Lights steadied again. Her breath eased, stabilized. Good instincts. You're handling this better than most regional pilots I've worked with. Allowed the faintest smile. Thanks. But inside, the pressure swelled. Every mistake she didn't make only built the fear of the next one she might. Then it happened, sudden, jarring. A sharp tone blared. Red light on the panel flashed. Autopilot disengaged, she cried. The yoke shuddered in her grip, no longer steady, alive in her hands now. The aircraft wobbled slightly, nose dipping. Okay, his voice cut in quickly. Don't fight it hard. Hands on the yoke, feet on the rudder pedals. Small corrections, just like the simulator. Fingers tightened. Her shoes pressed into the pedals, barely reaching but reaching enough. She breathed once, twice, then steadied the aircraft. "Got it," she said, voice taut. "Good girl, you're flying, it's all you now." The words were terrifying and liberating. For the first time, she wasn't a passenger pretending at flight. She wasn't a gamer in her room. She was a pilot, holding the weight of sky and steel in her hands. Her heartbeat slowed, not calm, not yet, but steady enough. Through the windshield, the clouds broke, and there it was, faint, distant, but real. Runway lights glowing like a silver thread against the darkening earth. His breath hitched. "I see it." In the tower, smiled through tears. "That's Augusta Regional. That's your runway, Captain. That's home." On the ground, fire trucks lined the asphalt. Ambulances idled, lights flashing. Medics waited with stretchers. News crews had already gathered at the perimeter, cameras aimed at the sky. But up here it was just, "Okay, let's bring it down." "Copy, first flaps 1." Pulled the lever. The jet shifted, nose dipping slightly. "Flaps 1 confirmed. Speed 210 knots." "Perfect. Gear don't lower yet. Just locate the lever." "I see it. Armed, not engaged." "Good, hold it there. You'll drop gear when I say." Another beep. Electrical warning again. "Voltage dropping," reported, heart hammering. "Switch to secondary bus. Use APU power if needed." She flipped the switches, steady, stabilized again. "Good girl, better than half the pilots I've worked with." Let out a shaky laugh. "Don't tell them that." Chuckled, then her tone shifted, solemn again. "Okay, next step, ILS approach. Have you used one before?" His answer came without hesitation. "In the simulator, a lot." "Good, it'll guide you straight to runway 17. Just follow the diamonds. Don't chase them, follow them." Outside, crosswinds buffeted the fuselage. Adjusted rudder instinctively, keeping her nose lined with the horizon. "You're reading the wind beautifully," praised. His eyes burned. "I hope Mom can see me." Silence, then voice softened. "She can, and she's proud." Swallowed hard. The runway grew closer, brighter, steadier. Her hands didn't shake anymore. "Okay," she said, "what's next?" Why did the runway look so impossibly small? From 30,000 feet, Earth looked endless. Patchwork fields, silver rivers, the soft gray blur of cities. But now, as the aircraft dropped through layers of cloud, the thin strip of lights ahead looked like nothing more than a fragile thread stretched across the dark. His hands clenched the yoke. "Okay," his voice filled her headset. Calm, unwavering, like an anchor in a storm. "Time for gear down, pull the lever." Wrapped her hand around the cold metal and lowered it. A heavy clunk reverberated through the floor. Green lights blinked on the panel. "Gear down confirmed," she reported. "Good, now flaps 20." She reached for the lever again, easing it into position. The aircraft tilted, nose dipping slightly, speed decreasing. The sensation pressed her stomach into her spine, but she held steady. "Flaps 20 confirmed. Airspeed 185 knots." "Perfect, you're on final approach now." The words sent a shiver down her spine. Final approach. The moment her simulator flights had always built toward, except now there was no reset button. Behind her, the unconscious pilots groaned faintly. She glanced back. Captain stirred again, lips parting, but his eyes fluttered closed once more. "The captain's trying to wake up, but he's not there yet." "Copy, don't waste focus on him. He'll live. Right now, everyone else is counting on you." Faced forward again, her throat tightened. "Everyone else." Through the cockpit door came muffled noise. Yelling, crying, prayers. The passengers knew now. Some must have realized the truth. Fear vibrated through the airframe as if the plane itself could feel their panic. She pressed her lips together. "What if I mess this up?" A pause, then's voice gentle but firm. Listen to me, every pilot thinks that before their first landing. Every single one, but the truth, you're not messing it up. You're bringing it home. One step at a time, just trust yourself. His eyes drifted for a second to the photo taped to the yoke. Her mother, Rachel Carter, Air Force uniform, hair pulled tight, smile that looked more like quiet defiance than joy. The woman who had taught her that courage wasn't loud. It was silent, patient, certain. Her vision blurred, she blinked hard. "Help me, Mom, please," said softly as if reading her thoughts. "I don't know what voice you hear when it gets hard up there, but hold on to it. Let it carry you." Nodded, throat too tight for words. The altimeter ticked down, 6,000, 5,000. "Okay," his voice sharpened, steady and sure. "Time to intercept the glide slope. Ease your nose down. You should see the diamonds on your display. Keep the wings level. Don't chase the glide path. Let it come to you." Adjusted gently. The jet responded like a living creature, dipping into the invisible line of descent. "I've got it," she whispered. "Copy, you're locked in." The wind shifted suddenly, cross gusts battering the fuselage. The nose veered. She corrected instinctively with rudder, yoke, steady pressure. "Left crosswind," she called, her voice low, calm. "Beautiful correction," praised. But the turbulence didn't stop. The storm that had been trailing them was finally catching up, sending fingers of wind clawing at the plane's wings. In the cabin, passengers screamed as the jet rocked. Claire's voice cut through the chaos. "Stay seated, belts fastened." His father pressed his hands flat to the seat in front of him, whispering, "Come on, Em, just like the simulator, just like the simulator." But this wasn't like the simulator, this was real. The runway lights ahead flickered between gusts, sometimes visible, sometimes lost in darkness. Hands tightened on the yoke. She whispered, "The wind's pushing hard." "Ride it out, small corrections only. Don't overreact, trust the bird, she wants to fly straight." Breathed once, twice. She eased her grip, letting the aircraft settle itself with her guidance instead of fighting against her. Slowly, the plane leveled. "Good," said, "very good." 3,000 feet. The runway stretched larger now, its lights glowing like a necklace laid across the earth. "Okay, flaps full, speed 145 knots." Pulled the lever to its final notch. The flaps extended with a deep mechanical groan. Air resistance pressed the jet backward, slowing her descent. She adjusted throttle, holding speed steady. "Flaps full confirmed, speed 145. "Perfect, you're lined up beautifully. You're going to hand fly it all the way down." Her chest tightened, "All the way." "Yes, not an option, it's you now, but you're ready." Her throat constricted. She wanted to scream that she wasn't ready, that she was 12, that this wasn't fair, but her hands stayed firm. "Calm is your co-pilot." 2,000 feet. Wind buffeted again, sharp and angry. She corrected smoothly. "Looking good," his voice soothed. "Stay with the glide, you're right on path." In the cabin, chaos reached its peak. A man shouted, "We're too low, we're crashing." Others sobbed openly. Children clung to parents. Claire buckled herself into her knuckles white. Heard none of it. Her world narrowed to the runway ahead, the instruments glowing steady, his voice in her ear. 1,000 feet. "Okay, this is it. Flare just above the runway. Ease back pressure. Throttle idle. Let the mains touch first." She nodded, though sweat stung her eyes. 700. 500. Her father's voice carried faintly through the cockpit door, trembling but proud. "Come on, baby. You can do this." Whispered back, though no one heard, "Help me out, Mom." The altimeter ticked. 300. 200. 100. Now whispered. Pulled throttle gently back, eased pressure on the yoke. The nose lifted slightly. The runway filled her vision, glowing, rushing up. And then impact. A bounce, not hard, not soft. The wheels screamed, rubber burning against asphalt. The jet settled, shuddered, locked into earth. Thrust reversers, his voice barked. Shoved the levers forward. A roar thundered as engines reversed thrust, dragging the jet down the runway. The cabin erupted, screams, sobs, cheers all tangled together, but wasn't listening. Brakes, commanded. Her feet pressed the pedals. The jet slowed, rolling steady, lined with the center lights. 60 knots, 50. She eased the reversers back, braked smoothly. 40, 30. The runway lights blurred through tears. 20, 10. The jet slowed to a crawl. Taxiway Bravo ahead, his voice cracked with emotion. You did it, you're on the ground, you brought her home. Exhaled a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Her arms felt like jelly, her lungs burned, but she'd done it. The impossible. The plane rolled to a stop. Silence filled the cockpit for a single breath before the cabin behind her exploded into thunderous applause. She leaned back in the chair, staring at her hands. They shook now violently, but they had held steady when it mattered. Behind her, the cockpit door opened. Her father stood there, eyes wet, voice breaking. You did it, baby. You saved all of us. She looked up at him, dazed. Was that real? His arms wrapped around her tight, trembling. It was real, and you were incredible. For the first time, let herself cry. And somewhere deep in her heart, her mother's voice whispered, proud and fierce, calm as your co-pilot. You listened well. Why was everyone starring? That was the first thought when stepped out of the cockpit. Not the roar of applause, not the tears streaming down strangers' faces, not even her father's trembling arms wrapped tight around her shoulders. It was the eyes, dozens of them, wide, wet, locked on her as if she weren't a 12-year-old girl at all, but something else, something they couldn't quite name. The air smelled of fuel and rubber, burned from the landing. The engine still ticked with heat as the aircraft sat motionless on the runway. Outside, rain began to speckle the windows, storm clouds finally catching up to them. Inside, chaos spilled into awe. Passengers surged forward, crowding the aisle, pressing against the open cockpit door. Some held their phones high, recording shaky videos. Others reached out as if touching her arm might confirm she was real. You flew the plane," a man whispered, his lips trembling. "She landed it," Claire said, voice hoarse but firm. "Every bit of it." The words rippled like shockwaves. A murmur turned to gasps, gasps to tears, tears to cheers. A woman clasped hands in her own, whispering, "Thank you, God bless you, thank you." Stood frozen. The attention pressed against her like a weight heavier than the yoke. She hadn't done it for thanks. She hadn't done it for history. She had done it because no one else could. But now everyone was looking at her like she had rewritten what was possible. Her father knelt, cupping her face. "You saved me," he whispered, voice cracking. "You saved all of us." Blinked, her hands still shook. "I thought I was going to kill you," she said quietly. Pulled her close again, his chest trembling against hers. "You didn't, you fought, you won." The cabin door opened. Paramedics rushed in, uniforms flashing yellow in the dim light. They swarmed the unconscious pilots first, slipping oxygen masks over their faces, checking pulses, voices rapid and clipped. "Hypoxia," one medic muttered. "They're lucky the kid acted fast." Flinched the kid. Her eyes darted back to the captain's chair, empty now, but still glowing with the afterimage of her hands clutching the controls. For a second, she thought she might faint. "Miss Carter," a medic called, kneeling in front of her. "Are you hurt, dizzy, short of breath?" She shook her head quickly. "I'm fine." But her voice sounded far away, as if it belonged to someone else. The medic studied her for a long moment, then gave a slow nod. "Fine," he echoed, almost in disbelief. More emergency crews boarded, guiding passengers out row by row. Some limped, some clutched at each other, most still pale and trembling. Each one passed with a glance, a word, a touch. "Thank you. You saved my family." I'll never forget this. One man stopped, voice breaking. I thought we were done for. He looked at her as if she were both a miracle and a mystery. How could you? Didn't answer, she didn't know how. Outside, the storm broke. Rain poured across the tarmac, thunder rolling like distant drums. Fire trucks idled with their lights spinning. Reporters already pressed against the perimeter fence, shouting, cameras flashing in the dark. Stepped into the rain, her shoes splashing against slick asphalt. The air was cold, soaking through her hair, plastering it to her forehead. But she barely noticed. Her mind was still back in the cockpit, hearing the hum of engines, the beeping of instruments, the voice of guiding her down. Her father called, hurrying down the mobile stairs with a rescue blanket. He wrapped it around her small shoulders, his own eyes shining. "You're shivering." She nodded faintly, though she wasn't sure it was from cold. Crowds pressed closer, flashbulbs popped, reporters shouted questions. "How did you do it? Were you scared? What went through your mind when you took the controls?" Her lips parted, but no words came. How could she explain that she'd only done what her mother had taught her, that calm was the only weapon you had when everything else broke apart? A firefighter shook his head as he passed. "She's just a kid," he muttered. Another replied, staring at with something like reverence, "No, she's a damn pilot." Blinked at the storm overhead, at the heavy sky she had just descended from. Only then did it sink in. She hadn't just flown, she had carried lives, she had carried history. And she was still standing. The terminal was chaos. News vans had arrived, satellite dishes spinning, anchors rehearsing live updates. Passengers gave statements, some still trembling, others clutching their children as if afraid to let go. The story had already spread online. Phones buzzed with alerts. 12-year-old girl lands passenger jet. Inside a quiet corner of the terminal, sat wrapped in another blanket, a steaming cup of hot chocolate trembling in her hands. Her father sat beside her, his own face pale with exhaustion. "Drink," he urged gently. "It'll help." She sipped slowly. Her throat still felt raw, her chest heavy with something she couldn't name. A shadow fell over her. Looked up. A woman stood there, headset hanging around her neck, security escorting her through the crowd. Yep. For a moment neither spoke, then knelt, lowering herself to eye level. "You're even braver in person," said with a soft smile. Lips twitched. "You're shorter than I imagined." They both laughed, weak and shaky, but it was laughter nonetheless. Gaze softened. "What you did up there, it shouldn't have been possible. You're 12, no training, no certification. And yet you flew, you navigated, you corrected, you landed in a storm. That wasn't simulation skill. That was instinct. That was heart." Looked down. "My mom always said flying was 90% mental, the rest was heart." Throat tightened. "Your mom was right." Nodded slowly, clutching the cup. Hours passed. Investigators pored over the aircraft, tracing the malfunction to a bleed air valve. The pilots, recovering in medical tents, still looked dazed. Captain asked to meet her privately. She entered the small office, heart hammering. He stood leaning on a chair, pale but alive. "You flew my aircraft," he said, voice rough. Looked at her shoes. "I just tried my best." "You didn't just try," said firmly. "You handled it like a pro. You were born for this." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a pair of silver wings, his own, worn smooth from years of flight. "I've only given these away once before, to my daughter on her wedding day. I'd be honored if you accepted them." His eyes blurred with tears. She reached out, hands trembling as she took them. "Thank you, Captain." He smiled faintly. "No, Captain, thank you." That night in the hotel room the airline had arranged, couldn't sleep. The room was quiet, the storm outside finally fatting. But her body still hummed with the vibration of engines. Her ears still rang with the beeping of instruments. Her heart still raced with the descent. She stepped onto the balcony, the silver wings still in her palm. The night air smelled of rain, cool against her skin. Stars peeked through broken clouds, the same sky she had fought her way down from. Her father joined her quietly, wrapped in a rescue blanket. "How are you feeling?" he asked softly. Hesitated, tired, alive, weird. Nodded, "That's a good answer." Silence lingered. Then she asked the question that had gnawed at her since touchdown. "Do you think Mom would have been proud?" His eyes glistened. "She would have saluted you." His lips curved faintly. "She always said I had her stubborn streak." "She also said you had her guts," added. Turned the wings over in her hand, their weight pressing into her palm. Real wings, not plastic, not imagination. Wings earned in steel and storm. Her chest ached, but for the first time it wasn't only grief. It was something else, something like hope. Why did the world suddenly know her name? Carter sat at the edge of a hotel bed, the silver wings glinting on the nightstand beside her. The television flickered across the room. Every channel seemed to carry her face. The grainy passenger videos, the shaky footage of her stepping off the plane, the soaked image of a 12-year-old wrapped in a rescue blanket. Child pilot saves 187 lives. Miracle in the sky. Courage under pressure. She muted the sound. It was too much. Her father emerged from the bathroom, towel draped around his shoulders. He looked at the screen, then at her. "You're everywhere," he murmured. Pulled her knees to her chest. "I don't want to be." But wanting didn't matter. The world had decided. The next morning the storm had cleared, but the chaos had not. Reporters filled the lobby. Cameras followed her to the car. Strangers stopped to shake her hand, to thank her, to ask for a photo. She smiled politely, but her chest felt tight, each question slicing deeper. "What went through your head in those final moments? Were you scared? Did you think of your mother?" Her mother. That was the hardest part. Every headline tied her name to Rachel Carter, decorated Air Force pilot, fallen hero, now the mother of the girl who had saved Flight 782. Loved her, missed her, but she didn't want to be defined by her absence. She wanted her mother beside her, not as a headline. In quiet moments, she found herself whispering into the silence, "I wish you'd been there. I wish it hadn't been me." The recognition built quickly, too quickly. A call came from the White House within days, and her father were flown to Washington. She walked through corridors lined with flags, escorted by solemn men in suits. In the Rose Garden, she stood before cameras, the president's hand warm on her shoulder. "You reminded us all what courage looks like," he said, his voice carrying across the lawn, across the nation. Then, leaning down so only she could hear, "You also reminded the world to listen when young people speak up." Applause thundered, blinked against the flash of cameras. The moment felt surreal, like she was watching someone else. When the ceremony ended, knelt beside her. "You did good," he whispered. Forced a small smile, but inside she wondered, did I, or did I just get lucky? Letters began to arrive by the hundreds. Children from around the world wrote to her. "Because of you, I'm not afraid to try. Before I saw you, I thought girls couldn't fly. Now I know we can. You're my hero." She kept one letter folded in her backpack, written by a girl in Pakistan. "Before I saw you, I thought girls like us couldn't fly. Now I know we can." That letter, more than the medals or ceremonies, made her cry. But the fame had teeth. Reporters camped outside her school. Classmates looked at her differently, some in awe, others in jealousy. Whispers followed her down the hall. "She thinks she's better than us now. She's famous. She's not normal." She missed being invisible. She missed being the quiet girl who read flight manuals at lunch, who traced clouds in her notebook. Now, even her friends didn't know what to say to her. At night, lying awake, doubts circled like vultures. What if it was just luck? What if I couldn't do it again? What if I'm not who they think I am? Her father noticed. One evening he sat beside her on the bedroom floor, leaning against the wall. "You know," he began, "your mom doubted herself too." Looked up startled. After her first night flight, she came home in tears, said she wasn't cut out for it, said she wasn't good enough. "What did she do?" whispered. Smiled faintly. "She went back up the next morning, and the one after that, and the one after that." His lips curved slowly. "So I should keep flying." "That's up to you," he said gently. "But from where I'm sitting, the sky seems to be waiting for you." A new routine began. Not fame, not ceremonies, flight. Called often, connecting with a local instructor, a retired commercial pilot named Tom Harper. Dry humor, gruff voice, but steady hands. "So," he said on their first day, eyeing her, "you landed a before passing algebra. Impressive." Smirked faintly. "Well, I passed algebra eventually." Their first lesson was in a 172. Small, clunky, nothing like the 737, but when the wheels lifted off the ground, his chest filled with the same spark. The hum of the engine, the tilt of the horizon, the sky opening like a door she already knew. Tom watched her carefully as she guided the little aircraft. "You don't just fly," he muttered. "You feel it." She smiled for real then, the first real smile in weeks. Flying was home. Months passed, the headlines faded, the cameras stopped following, preferred it that way. She wasn't chasing attention anymore, she was chasing mastery. She studied flight manuals. She watched black box recreations, dissecting accidents to understand mistakes. She trained in the simulator, not for survival now, but for precision. At school, she gave a presentation on cockpit automation and why Flight 782's system had failed. Her classmates, once indifferent, sat rapt. One boy whispered, "You should be a pilot." Smiled softly, "That's the plan." By the end of summer, she completed her first supervised solo flight in the. When she landed, Tom simply nodded, pride hidden in his eyes. "Welcome to the sky, Captain Carter." Her chest swelled. She wasn't a miracle anymore, she was a pilot. And yet the memory never left her. At night she sometimes replayed the landing, the flashing runway, the roar of reversers, the thunder of applause. She remembered the fear pressing into her chest, the doubt clawing at her throat. But more than that, she remembered her mother's voice, "Calm is your co-pilot." And each time she heard it, she whispered back, "I listened, Mom. I really did." The world had called her a miracle, but knew better. She hadn't been a miracle. She had been a child who refused to freeze. And sometimes that was enough. Why did the cockpit no longer scare her? Carter, now 15, zipped up her flight suit and tugged at the collar. The fabric was still stiff, new, but her name stitched over the chest, Carter, already felt natural. She ran her hand along the fuselage of the twin-engine trainer, metal cold beneath her fingers. 3 years had passed since she'd taken the yoke of a 737 with no business being there. 3 years since the world had called her a miracle. But today, as she stood at the edge of a Colorado runway with the sun spilling gold across the mountains, she didn't feel like a miracle. She felt like a pilot. "Ready?" Tom Harper asked. Her instructor's eyes were sharp, his mouth set in its usual dry line. Smirked always. They climbed aboard, strapped in, engines humming alive. As the aircraft lifted into the morning sky, his hands moved with certainty. Barrel turns, stall recoveries, crosswind correction. Her movements were precise, practiced, disciplined. When they landed, Tom glanced at her. "You remember what I told you the first day?" Grinned, "That you don't usually train child prodigies." He chuckled. "No, I said if you ever land another jet, I hope I'm not on board." Laughed, the sound light, genuine, fair enough. Flying no longer terrified her, it freed her. That night she sat in her room, staring at a wall filled with memories. A framed photo of Flight 782 parked on the tarmac in Augusta, a brass plate beneath it. In the absence of fear, there is clarity. In the heart of a child, there is flight. Next to it, a shadow box. FAA pilot wings, controller badge, captain's silver airline wings. Tokens of a moment that had changed her forever. She opened her journal, writing the day's entry. Altitude 11,500 feet. Conditions clear. Notes. Sky still feels like home. Her pen lingered. Mom, I hope you'd be proud. A week later, she found herself standing backstage at the International Youth Aviation Summit in Seattle. She smoothed the front of her flight suit nervously as voices buzzed on the other side of the curtain. Hundreds of students from around the world sat waiting, notebooks ready, eyes bright with dreams. Her name was announced. Applause rippled. The spotlight burned as she stepped to the microphone. For a second she froze, not from fear of flying, but from fear of speaking. Then she remembered her mother's voice again, calm as your co-pilot. She inhaled steady. 3 years ago, she began, I landed a jet I had no business flying. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. I was 12, scared, and I kept thinking someone else should be doing this, someone older, someone trained, someone not me. She paused, faces leaned forward. But there was no one else, just me, and that moment taught me something I'll never forget. Courage doesn't wait for permission, it shows up when it's needed. Silence, then applause thundered. Some students cheered, others wiped their eyes. Afterward, they lined up to meet her. A boy from Brazil said, I want to be a pilot now because of you. A girl from Japan handed her a drawing of With Wings. She signed every notebook, hugged every student, smiled through every photo. It wasn't ego, it was duty. She knew now, the story no longer belonged just to her. It belonged to anyone who had ever doubted themselves. Months later, surprised her with a trip to the National Air and Space Museum. They wandered past moon landers, warplanes, rockets. Then they reached a new exhibit. Stopped cold. Behind glass sat the cockpit seat from Flight 782. Her seat. A photo of her at 12, headset too big, eyes locked on the horizon mounted above. A plaque read. When both pilots blacked out mid-flight, one young girl stepped forward and saved 187 lives. This seat is where courage sat. Her throat tightened. They asked permission to put it here, her father said quietly. I didn't want to spoil the surprise. Blinked back tears. I don't feel like a museum piece. You're not, said. He placed a hand on her shoulder. You're proof. Proof that when you raise a child to believe in themselves, there are no limits. She stared at the seat at the girl she once was. Her hands trembled not from fear but from the sheer weight of memory. She wasn't that trembling child anymore, but she carried her with her, always. Years later, Carter would become one of the youngest licensed commercial pilots in the country. She would study aerospace engineering, designing safer cockpit systems to prevent exactly what had happened that day. And in every cockpit she entered, she kept a small silver tag from Flight 782 on her keychain. When asked in an interview what moment had defined her career, she didn't mention the medals or the White House ceremony or the museum exhibit. She simply said, it wasn't when I landed the plane. It was when I realized I could have given up and didn't. Because sometimes, when the sky turns dangerous and the world starts spinning, all it takes is a child who refuses to panic. And that is how legends take flight. Why did the sky still call to her? Carter sat alone in the cockpit of a engine silent, parked at the gate long after passengers had gone. The cabin lights glowed faint blue, shadows stretching across rows of empty seats. Outside, rain streaked the glass, each drop lit by the glow of floodlights on the tarmac. She was 26 now, a captain in her own right, a woman who had logged thousands of hours across oceans and continents. No longer a trembling girl at 12, no longer the miracle. Yet whenever she sat in the captain's chair, whenever her hands wrapped around the yoke, she still felt the echo of that first flight. The hum of instruments, the beeping descent, the sound of her own voice whispering, "Help me, Mom." And sometimes she swore she heard her mother's voice answer. She had built a life in the sky. Commercial captain, aerospace engineer, advocate for youth in aviation, but none of it ever eclipsed that one day at 30,000 feet. It was a shadow she carried everywhere. Sometimes in interviews people still asked, "How did it feel?" She never gave them the answer they wanted. She never spoke about destiny or divine miracles. She said the truth quietly. It felt terrifying, and it felt necessary. Because courage wasn't glory, it wasn't medals. It was the stillness between panic and action, the decision to move anyway. Her father had grown older, hair gray at the temples, eyes softer. He still carried the same pride in his gaze whenever he looked at her. But there was also relief now, relief that the girl who once carried his life in her trembling hands had grown into a woman strong enough to carry her own. On her desk at home sat a shadow box. Inside were the symbols of that day: FAA wings, controller badge, captain's silver wings, and the letter from a girl in Pakistan, still folded, edges frayed. "Before I saw you, I thought girls like us couldn't fly. Now I know we can." Read it often. It reminded her why her story mattered, not because she had survived, but because it had lit something in others. The still displayed her cockpit seat. She had visited it once as an adult, standing quietly in the corner as pressed against the glass, wide-eyed, staring at the plaque. "This is where courage sat." One boy whispered, "She was my age." Smiled softly. They didn't know she was there, and she didn't correct them. The story belonged to them now, not her. Years later, she found herself standing on a stage again. This time not as a girl giving testimony, but as a keynote speaker at a global aviation safety conference. She looked out at hundreds of faces, pilots, engineers, leaders. She thought of her mother, her father, Tom Harper, every passenger she'd saved without ever knowing their names. She told the story one more time, not as a legend but as a lesson. "When the systems failed and the pilots went down, I was terrified. I thought someone else should step up, someone older, someone trained, but there was no one else, and I realized something I've carried ever since. Courage doesn't ask if you're ready, it just asks if you're willing, and sometimes that's enough." The room was silent. Then the applause came, steady, powerful, rising like thunder. But didn't bask in it. She simply nodded once, stepped back from the podium, and carried the silence with her. One evening, years later, she sat on her porch in Colorado, watching the sunset bleed orange across the Rockies. The air was cool, the sky endless. In her lap lay a worn flight manual, pages curled at the edges. Her father sat beside her in a rocking chair, sipping tea. They watched the horizon together, quiet. "Do you ever think about it?" asked softly. "All the time," she admitted. "And your mom?" Smiled faintly. "Every time I fly." Nodded, his eyes watered though he tried to hide it. She'd have been so proud. Didn't answer, she just looked at the horizon. In the silence she felt her mother's presence, not as grief anymore but as strength. Later that night she opened her journal, the same one she'd kept since she was 12. She flipped back to the old entry from Flight 782, "Stay calm. Trust what you've learned. Never wait for someone else to act." She traced the words with her finger. Then she wrote her entry: altitude, infinite. Condition, clear. Notes: dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. She closed the book, placed it on her nightstand, and turned off the light. The world would always remember her as the child who saved 187 lives. The miracle at 30,000 feet. But Carter knew the truth. She hadn't been chosen. She hadn't been ready. She had simply refused to give in to fear. And that was enough. Sometimes legends aren't born from destiny. Sometimes they're born from silence, from stillness, from the moment when someone decides to move anyway. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.